In the hush before dawn, a lone priest lights a candle in a grand stone hall. The flame flickers, casting grotesque shadows on frescoed walls. Outside, armies gather. The air smells of incense, metal, sweat. Somewhere beyond the walls, a king kneels in prayer, seeking divine consent to unleash his legions. Throughout human history, religion has not merely consoled the dying, it has justified the slaughter. When blades clash beneath banners inscribed with holy names, when prayers echo across battlements, when devotees are told that their destruction is righteous, the boundary between faith and violence blurs. Empires have risen under sacred names, prophets have whispered the sanction of conquest, and millions have marched believing they held divine approval. Yet behind every consecrated spear lies the blood of innocence, the fracture of belief, the weight of suppressed doubts. This is not a lecture in dusty halls. This is a descent through ages, where faith and war danced a terrifying waltz. We will walk from desert temples to grand cathedrals, from peasant fields to royal courts, seeing how devotion became a weapon, and how the cries of war were masked by sacred hymns. In unveiling this intersect of the holy and the brutal, we confront a chilling question. When religion claims the right to justify war, who is truly righteous and who pays the ultimate price? Part 1. Divine Edicts and Mortal Armies. The dust was still settling over Jerusalem. The year was 1099. The First Crusade had reached its brutal climax. What had been a city of worship and wonder became a charnel house. Crusaders, cloaked in white crosses, waded through blood said to reach their knees. And when questioned how to distinguish enemy from friend in a city so diverse, the reply echoed coldly, "Kill them all. God will know his own." This was no ordinary war. It was holy, justified not by politics alone, but by sacred scripture, by visions, by the word of priests and popes who claimed to speak on behalf of heaven itself. Religion has always had the power to unite and to destroy. From the deserts of Arabia to the forests of Europe, divine justification has given men reason to kill without guilt, to conquer without shame, and to believe that every sword thrust was an act of worship. Faith, in its purest form, can be beautiful, but in the hands of emperors and warlords, it becomes something else. It becomes a crown, a weapon, a shield against doubt. Long before crusaders marched, the ancient Assyrians invoked Ashur, their chief god, before laying siege to cities. Their kings were not just men, they were chosen, divine proxies. And when they sent armies to raze towns and enslave survivors, they didn't call it war, they called it sacred duty. In ancient India, the Bhagavad Gita, a foundational Hindu text, centers on a Prince Arjuna torn between duty and morality. On the battlefield, he hesitates to fight his own kin, but Krishna, his charioteer and a god in disguise, urges him to kill, not in anger, but as part of his divine role in the cosmic order. War, in this telling, is not evil, it's the fulfillment of spiritual obligation. Across the sea, Roman emperors deified themselves. Julius Caesar claimed a divine lineage, but later emperors like Constantine went further. In the 4th century, Constantine had a vision, a burning cross in the sky, bearing the words in this sign, "Conquer." He converted to Christianity and led his armies under the symbol of Christ. The same Christ who had preached, turning the other cheek, now became a war banner. How does this happen? How does love for the divine turn into bloodshed? The answer lies not in gods, but in men, in their ambitions, in their fears. Religion, after all, speaks to the deepest parts of the human soul, our fear of death, our hope for justice, our desire for meaning. And when leaders learn to manipulate that, to speak in the language of salvation and damnation, they command not just armies, but hearts. The Crusades are perhaps the most infamous example in Western memory. Sparked by a single speech from Pope Urban II in 1095, tens of thousands took up arms. He described the Eastern Christians suffering under Muslim rule, claimed their churches were desecrated, their people tortured, but more than that, he offered something irresistible. All who die in battle will have their sins forgiven. For a medieval peasant, this was not just war, it was a guaranteed ticket to heaven. Imagine that. One moment you're a farmer, barely surviving winter, fearing eternal damnation. The next, you're told that by killing strangers in a distant land, paradise is assured. Not all were driven by faith alone. Many crusaders sought land, glory, and riches, but faith wrapped those ambitions in moral armor. Greed became justice, violence became virtue. Yet this wasn't unique to Christianity. In the 7th century, as Islam spread from the Arabian Peninsula, early Muslim armies marched not merely as conquerors, but as bringers of divine law. The Prophet Muhammad united fractured tribes under a single religious vision, and after his death, the caliphs expanded that vision with sword and scripture alike. The Quran contains verses of peace, but also of struggle, of jihad, often misunderstood in the modern West. While it can mean personal spiritual struggle, it also historically justified military action in defense of the faith or against oppression. But where is the line between defense and expansion, between protection and ambition? As the Rashidun and Umayyad caliphates spread into Persia, North Africa, and Spain, they brought with them not just military force, but Islamic civilization, libraries, law, architecture. For many, under their rule, especially Jews and Christians, life improved. But for others, especially during revolts or resistance, death came swiftly, and always in the name of righteousness. And therein lies the paradox. Religion, at its best, can build bridges, preserve knowledge, offer peace. At its worst, it becomes a divine excuse for conquest, colonization, and cruelty. But the battlefield wasn't the only place religion justified violence. In Spain, the Inquisition turned neighbor against neighbor. Beginning in the 15th century, the Catholic Church sought to root out heresy, particularly among converted Jews and Muslims suspected of secretly practicing old faiths. Trials were held, torture used, executions carried out, and always under the guise of saving souls. Think about that. Not punishing criminals, not quelling rebellion, but saving souls, burning people alive for their eternal good. How do you resist such a force? When your persecutor believes they are doing God's work, how do you defend yourself without becoming the heretic they already believe you to be? The answer, for many, was silence, surrender, or exile. And yet, resistance did happen. Across centuries, there were those who questioned these so-called holy wars. Mystics, rebels, poets. Some whispered doubts, others shouted defiance and were killed for it. But each left behind echoes that challenged the grand narrative. In 1618, Europe erupted into the 30 Years' War, a devastating conflict that began as a religious struggle between Protestant and Catholic states within the Holy Roman Empire. It spiraled into one of the deadliest wars in European history, claiming over 8 million lives. Villages were razed, populations starved, armies rampaged, claiming divine authority as they looted and massacred. Entire regions were reduced to ash. What began as theological disagreement ended in total horror. And when the Peace of Westphalia was finally signed in 1648, it wasn't just a treaty. It was a silent admission. Perhaps religion should no longer be the justification for kings to make war. But the lesson didn't last. Across oceans, colonizers brought not only gunpowder and steel, but Bibles. Missionaries often preceded muskets. In the Americas, Africa, and Asia, European powers cloaked colonization in spiritual terms. Natives weren't just conquered, they were civilized, baptized, and told their old gods were demons. Entire cultures were erased, languages lost, and always, the justification came down to salvation, saving souls, cleansing heathens, spreading light to those in darkness. But who decided what darkness was? And what of the sacred rites, the ancient songs, the rituals that had sustained those peoples for generations? They were burned, buried, and forgotten. Casualties in a war fought not just for land, but for spiritual dominance. The echoes of those wars still ripple today. In every corner of the world, you'll find battlefields that once rang with hymns and cries of victory, both offered to the same God. You'll find graves where children were buried beside the swords of fathers who believed their death was divine. And yet, through it all, religion persists, because while it has been misused, twisted, and weaponized, it also offers hope, healing, identity, community. The question we face isn't whether religion causes war, It's whether we, as humans, are capable of separating belief from power, devotion from dominance. And as history shows, the answer is far from clear. Now we turn to the everyday lives shaped by these holy wars, to the farmers caught between empires, the women whose rituals were outlawed, the children raised with tales of martyrs and miracles. This is the world not of kings and popes alone, but of survivors. Part 2. Ritual, Siege, and the Sacred Justification. In the shadow of the great wars marched those who never held a sword, the butcher, the midwife, the monk with trembling hands, the child who looked up at burning skies and whispered words to gods he barely understood. While kings declared holy wars and generals raised banners of divine wrath, ordinary people lived beneath the crushing weight of belief twisted into violence. And it is there, among the footfalls of the forgotten, that the true cost of religious war is most deeply written. In a Saxon village near the Rhine, during Charlemagne's brutal campaign to Christianize northern Europe, bonfires once lit the dark in celebration of ancient gods. Trees were sacred, rivers were alive. But when the emperor's knights arrived, the groves were cut down. The people were told to kneel or died. Thousands did die. Thousands more were baptized at sword point. And with them, centuries of oral memory lost to ash and silence. Their food changed. Their prayers changed. Their festivals were banned, replaced with saints they did not know, rituals they could not speak. But still, in hushed corners, old songs were sung under breath, not to defy, but to survive. Religion did not merely justify the war, it rewrote the soul of a people. The same echoed in the Andes. When Spanish conquistadors arrived, they were outnumbered and far from home, yet they claimed divine right over a mighty empire. The Inca were accused of worshipping false gods. Their temples, many of them astronomical wonders aligned with the stars, were looted. Gold, once used in sacred offerings to Inti, the sun god, was melted into crosses and coins. Priests walked behind the soldiers, and behind the priests came fire. The Inca, like many indigenous cultures, did not view the sacred and the secular as separate. Every planting of the field was a prayer. Every weaving of cloth held symbolic meaning. When these were forbidden, it wasn't just religion that was taken, it was memory. In Mexico, the Aztecs' capital city of Tenochtitlan, with its vast temples and intricate rituals, was described by early Spanish observers as both horrifying and magnificent. The Spanish were repelled by human sacrifice, yet they too shed blood in rivers. The justification, the cross, the crown, the will of God. One Spanish chronicler recorded that during the siege of Tenochtitlan, an entire street ran red for days, and above the battlefield, banners of Christ fluttered in the wind. To those wielding the sword, it was a triumph of faith. To those beneath it, it was the end of the world. But justification wasn't always declared from thrones. Sometimes it crept in quietly, disguised as protection. In the Ottoman Empire, Christians and Jews were labeled dhimmi, protected people under Islamic rule, permitted to practice their faith for attacks. On the surface, it offered tolerance rare for the time, but this tolerance was contingent. If a group was seen as disloyal, or if religious tensions boiled over, violence was not far behind. In some regions, churches were destroyed or repurposed. Religious clothing marked the wearer. The price of peace was visibility and constant caution. Still, many found ways to coexist. There were Muslim scholars who translated Jewish texts, Christian architects who designed Ottoman mosques, Jews who found refuge in Muslim lands after being expelled from Christian Spain. The line between war and peace, between justification and tolerance, was always fragile, a tightrope stretched across centuries. In Japan, under the Tokugawa shogunate, Christianity was banned as a foreign threat. Missionaries were executed, converts forced to renounce their beliefs. Those who refused faced the fumi, a test where suspected Christians were ordered to step on an image of Christ or the Virgin Mary. To step was to live, to refuse was to die. In this, religion didn't justify war, it justified control. Suppression was framed as spiritual purity, the eradication of belief seen as an act of national salvation, and it wasn't confined to the East or West. In Africa, colonial campaigns often fused Christian missionary work with military conquest. Local religions were dismissed as primitive, demonic. Sacred sites were bulldozed, elders silenced, entire communities re-educated through force. And while some Africans adopted Christianity and found strength in it, forming independent churches that challenged colonial rule, the initial spread was rarely peaceful. It came with whips, guns, and hymns sung over burning villages. These were not wars between gods. These were wars between men, using gods as banners. Yet, through the smoke and ruin, through the sermons justifying bloodshed, there remained something defiant. Hidden rituals, secret texts, resistance woven into lullabies and folktales. Faith, once weaponized, became a shield again, not for conquest, but for endurance. Even in the Holocaust, religion was invoked. The Nazis, though not explicitly religious in doctrine, co-opted Christian symbols and narratives to justify anti-Semitism. Centuries of Christian teachings that painted Jews as Christ killers laid the foundation for industrial genocide. Churches across Europe remained silent, some even complicit. Yet there were priests and monks who risked everything to hide the persecuted. Faith was twisted, but it also became a refuge. After the war, the question echoed louder than ever. How could belief, meant to uplift, become complicit in horror? And perhaps no place embodies this tension more than modern-day Jerusalem, a city sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. It has seen crusades, conquests, partition, and uprising. In its alleys, soldiers patrol near ancient walls. Prayers rise from minarets, churches, and synagogues. And still, the streets run tense, not from theology, but from history. Generations have inherited scars carved by belief, because war in the name of religion doesn't end when the treaties are signed. It lingers in the stories we tell, the rituals we keep, the lines drawn on ancient maps. Today, religious violence still erupts in theocratic regimes, in sectarian clashes, in lone individuals convinced their God demands blood. The tools have changed, the stakes have grown, but the justifications echo ancient patterns. And so, the question remains, do we believe in peace because of religion, or despite it? Can belief be sacred without being dangerous? Is there a future where faith heals more than it divides? History offers warnings, not answers. We've walked through sieges and sermons, baptisms and executions, rituals of power and whispers of resistance. We've seen the divine used to crown kings, burn books, convert cities, and cleanse continents. But we've also seen faith in its rawest, most human form, not in the hands of emperors, but in the eyes of the mother lighting a candle in secret, in the child reciting old prayers by heart, though his temple lies in ruin, in the communities who survived, adapted, and reclaimed what was stolen. Religion may have justified wars, but it also helped some endure them. The legacy of these conflicts is not only in the monuments or the scriptures, but in the silence that follows, in the space where people decide what to believe, who to forgive, and whether to start again. And in that quiet, perhaps, we find the real miracle. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.